We've seen this in real life. Ideological groups that had the best of intentions. Yeah. When you make changes very quickly, sometimes bad things can happen. Parity, for instance, some tendencies towards centralization. People assume parity can deal with the marketing. Parity can deal with getting projects into the ecosystem. That's sort of antithetical to the goal of decentralization. If the network stops working, we're stuck. Right? It doesn't matter how democratic the system is if its network's not working. Conservatives' job is to stand athwart history saying stop. Everyone that's making decisions in Polkadot, all the dot holders, as far as I know, they're all people. They are swayed. I have to be a part of this.
The launch team wishes you good luck and Godspeed.
Space Monkeys blasting off at last with Bill Laboon. He's the head of education and grants at the Web3 Foundation. Bill, I have a lot of regrets in life, but none so great as waiting this long to get you on the show. So thanks very much for being here and welcome to Space Monkeys.
Thanks. Yeah, it's my pleasure, and I'm really really looking forward to it. It has been a long time that I've watched other people be interviewed.
Painful.
But now it's my turn.
Now it's your turn. You're so important to the work that happens at the Web3 Foundation. I'm wondering, however, what you were doing that prepared you for the work you're doing now.
Sure. So before working here, I actually was a lecturer, so teaching faculty at the University of Pittsburgh in the computer science department. And I taught courses on software engineering, software quality assurance, intro to programming, data structures, all that fun computer science stuff. But I found myself getting more and more interested in blockchain. Yeah. So I actually had heard about Bitcoin very early. I was doing some work on hash algorithms and like doing some analysis on them. And someone told me like, hey, there's this new money that uses hash algorithms called Bitcoin. And I was like, oh, so I took a look very early. And I said, okay, that's an interesting thought, but then really, ignored it for a while. But in 2012, I started getting into it. And then when Ethereum launched, I was like, okay, wow, this, more than you can just do so much. And so I really got involved. As far as I know, gave the first talk in Pittsburgh on Ethereum. Wow. I was an editor at Ledger, which is an academic journal of cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. Okay. Started teaching courses in blockchain. So I was just getting more and more involved, right? And I wrote my novel, Strength in Numbers, which is a science fiction novel all about cryptocurrency. I found myself focusing more on that and less on the teaching. Less on the teaching. I was still a good teacher, don't get me wrong.
Interesting.
But I just was finding it just so fascinating, what all could be done, and really saw this as the beginning of something new. Yeah. And one of the things I was really interested in was comparing blockchains, right? So actually had a project called Quack, quality analysis of cryptocurrency code bases, which is still out there somewhere on my GitHub, which would look at looked at Bitcoin and Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash, a few other 2017, 2018 era big coins, and would do automatic analysis of their code bases looking for bugs, and then you could compare them. So I was really interested in this comparison, right? Different blockchain systems have a lot of different trade-offs. Okay. And when I saw Gav's talk at 2018 Web3 Summit, and that was the classic one where he pulled out the laptop, the MacBook, and then made a blockchain and set parameters. I was just, wow, I have to be a part of this. Whoa. So I saw that in late 2018, like November 2018. I wasn't at Web3 Summit 2018. Sure. Then, I was like, reading all I could about Polkadot and Substrate, and I read the Polkadot paper, and I think my first commit to Substrate, just like updating a comment or something, was around then, and then I saw that Web3 Foundation was looking for someone to be a technical educator.
Perfect.
Yeah. So in March of 2019, started working at Web3 Foundation.
That's incredible. Just rolling back a little bit again, you heard about Bitcoin first, and then you said Ethereum. Really blew your mind there. What were the sort of use cases, and what sort of role did you imagine this technology would be playing in the future?
Wow. So yeah, that's a really good question. And one of the things is that I wasn't sure, right? But what I found really interesting is going to be, so I'm going to say, later on I thought of like, okay, here are specific use cases. And now we can see lots of specific use cases. But I remember at that time, I wasn't sure what all could be done with it, but I knew it was useful, right? So I could tell I actually thought, you really based on the name smart contracts, all right, this makes sense for contracts, right? I know that every month I have to pay my, whatever, what do you call it, auto bill or mortgage or something like that. But it's annoying. Every month I have to remember to do it, or I ask my bank to remember to do it for me, right? But then I have to remember I have enough money in the account and all that.
Same thing.
And so I was just thinking like, all right, well, I could just automate all of this stuff, right? And I really assumed that it would be a lot of end users programming, like what specific things they wanted to do.
I see.
With this.
Okay.
I think I was a little bit optimistic on that.
Sure.
But other things, right? Like when people die, right? Right now it's a huge process of I can't even remember the terms, but you have an executor of the estate, and then it goes to them, and then right, but this could very easily be automated. I could write my will if all of my assets are accounted for on chain. I could say, okay, under these circumstances, when you can assume someone dies under circumstances X, Y, and Z, then all right, it would go to this account, this account, this account. Everything would be automatic. I said we spend so much time, writing out contracts, analyzing them, and this is exactly what computers are for.
Yeah.
So I knew, I was like, well, I see that particular use case, like actually replacing contracts.
Yeah.
And controlling your own money and what can be done with it. And I said, well, if that can happen, I'm sure there's a lot more, because once you have like a Turing complete system, like, the EVM, you can do anything a computer can do, it could do. So I knew there were things I couldn't see, but, would be useful, right? Just like 20 years ago, I would not have thought of Twitter as something.
Right.
But now it's like, once you see it, like you can't live without it. Like, I don't know. Maybe I spent too much time on it.
Right. No, we're working.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you picked up at the Web3 Foundation with your educating. How did it change? How did your educating change? I guess your students were different.
Yeah, it's a very different approach, right? And I think it actually took me a while to understand that. It's one thing to understand it intellectually, but it's another to really, internalize it, I guess. And so you actually can see, one of the things that I first started working on was the blockchain fundamentals course.
Yes.
Because I said, all right, well, people, they need to understand, how a hash algorithm works, and how mining works, and how that's different than proof of stake, and I think it's been very useful. A lot of people like it and enjoy it.
My friend who was making a career change, he wanted to get into blockchain. He did that course, and his mind was so blown. Like when he started speaking to me about it, his eyes were so lit up. He found it so useful, and he did end up getting a career in blockchain.
That's awesome. I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah,
and I've heard that from quite a few people.
Yeah,
actually, there's some people I know that got into blockchain or Polkadot specifically because of that course. But I think also, I then had to explain a lot more things from a more user-facing perspective, or not the person that's going to dive a million feet deep.
Was it more about speaking to devs and onboarding devs, or was it wider?
So I would say at the very beginning, we definitely were much more focused on devs.
Yeah, right.
And we still are in some sense, right? Because we are technical educators. What I see really is the goal of the technical education team here is that we can provide all of the information for others to do their own work, right? And to produce things, and if they want to make their own courses, that they can, right? We provide all, we call ourselves like the source of truth, right? And sort of almost an inside joke, right? The less trust, more truth, but we're the source of truth. We make sure that the Polkadot wiki is always up to date, that we produce content that teaches people how to do things, and some of that is for the absolute end user, right? But we want to make sure that we can have others, producing educational content in our ecosystem.
No doubt.
And so part of that is providing that very fundamental, groundwork. A lesser part of that, I would say, is the, traditional end user. But both of them are important for technical education.
Are you guys ready for whatever Polkadot 2.0 will be?
Yeah. So for the future, we've really, been following everything that's going on with Agile Core Time. Yeah. With all the related things that may or may not be coming. Right. We're following the RFCs. We have a page on the wiki that is all about the the potential changes with, a disclaimer at the top that all of this is subject to change.
I see. So things that aren't even live yet.
We really are trying to make sure that, if you want to know something about Polkadot, you can, right? And so a big part of that, like I said, is the wiki. But the wiki is, it's fast. It's faster than writing a book or something. But we also, participate in the forums. If you go on the Polkadot water cooler, you'll see a lot of responses from Bill W3F. On Reddit, I try to answer any question I see on the Polkadot subreddit. We see what the community is saying and what questions they have. And I find that a very useful resource of what then should be added to the wiki.
That's right. So you are doing education, but then you have this other pillar of your responsibilities, which is community. How would you define the scope of the Web3, what the Web3 Foundation considers their, maybe the word is customers, maybe the word is users? What's the scope of that?
Wow. So I'm going to step back for a second and talk about what Web3 Foundation is, because I think that answers the first part of the question of what do we consider, who are the end users of Web3?
Yeah.
So Web3 Foundation is, as the name implies, a foundation. We're not a company.
Yeah.
We are in German is a Stiftung, and the German speakers can yell at me about my pronunciation. But, what that means is we have a goal, right? A goal of a company is to make money, right? Our goal is to bring about the decentralized internet, that is in the papers. Our founding papers. This is what we do, and we file that with the Canton of Zug, this is what we're doing, this is why we're here, right?
Right.
And that's why I'm here, right? It's what I always joke with people that blockchain, all it is a data structure. It's a way of putting data together. And if that's all it was, then there's no way I would be involved in this industry for 11 years, right? I'd get very bored very quickly. What I do believe in, right, is this promise of decentralization.
Yeah.
And this is what we're doing here. I see our users, the beneficiaries of Web3 Foundation, as the whole world.
Pretty big scope.
It's a very big scope. Yeah. And so how we're doing that is mostly through Polkadot. However, we have given grants, to a lot of researchers. We have given grants, and we had a lot of interactions with other related teams, like libp2p, like the blockchain fundamentals course. I wanted a way for everyone to freely learn about blockchain at a fundamental level, right? And if you go through that course, there's very little discussion about Polkadot, right? Because it's much broader. It's what is a blockchain and the related technology? How is it useful? What does Web3 mean? And that's why I said, I see our beneficiaries as the world, people that are interested in decentralization.
Beautiful. So you mentioned the grants there, and this is the other big piece of what you're doing here.
So I guess overseer. Yeah. So we have Sebastian Müller, who is the grants lead. That's his day-to-day focus is on the grants team. And we have a couple of grant evaluators. We have a grants committee, which is a whole group of people, which I'm a part of. David Howig, Roel, and Gav is actually on the grants committee that help decide what projects we should fund.
Sure. There's kind of we had a big grant announcement from the Web3 Foundation a couple weeks ago, right? This new fund.
$20 million US dollars and $5 million DOT.
Is there going to be a change in the structure of the grants program with this new commitment, or is it going to stay the same?
So these actually are two separate programs.
I see.
Yeah, so this may be confusing. So the grants program itself, the Web3 grants program, will continue as it always has.
Okay.
There may be some minor changes. We're talking about some tweaks about what we focus on, how grants get approved, but these are all essentially technical details of the grants process. But the same basic idea of the grants program, which is relatively small grants that are focused on software or research that is going to help either the Polkadot ecosystem as a whole or the decentralized internet as a whole. This is very focused. It has a very particular way of working. You need to submit a milestone. It needs to be approved. We have grant evaluators that are, professional engineers who actually, look into things and determine that it's working correctly. You can't announce it until that you're a Web3 grant recipient until you've finished your first milestone. There's this general process and the general focus will not change. So the grants program is going to continue.
Okay.
This Polkadot Decentralization Fund is a different project, has a different mandate. And the goal of this decentralization program is to help decentralize, the main goal, to help decentralize what we already have.
Yeah.
Parity, for instance, is like, very much in some ways, like, a centralizing, I shouldn't say a centralizing force, but like, some tendencies towards centralization. People assume that, all right, Parity can deal with the marketing. Parity can deal with getting projects into the ecosystem. Parity can deal with this. Parity can deal with that.
Yeah.
That's sort of antithetical to the goal of decentralization, right? When you have some entity that everyone points at, right? Even when you have two entities, right? Some people point at Web3 Foundation and say, oh, that's their job. And some people point at Parity and say that's their job.
Yeah.
Really, what we should be doing is having people think, all right, well, what can I do? How can I get involved?
That's right.
And I understand there are some barriers to that. What we want to do is remove at least some of those barriers. Hopefully, those financial barriers specifically won't be as much of an issue, right? And so we're looking to fund teams of all kinds who want to work in the Polkadot ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so we have so much money in a pot, and so much of that, according to the accountants and according to the council, basically our board, says, all right, we can spend this much money per year on grants.
When these requests come in to spend funds or people are applying for the grant, what's the flow from there? You mentioned all these different bodies here. How do they all interact, and what does it take for a grant to be approved?
There's two different mechanisms for how people come to the grants program.
Okay.
One is that they see an RFP from us. So an RFP, a request for proposal. We have a list, I think it's 16 different items right now.
Interesting.
Of like, we would like to see this. We want to give a grant for this.
Okay.
And so some people say, hey, I saw you have an RFP for whatever. There was one recently for like a sub-consensus for parachains. I would like to apply for that. Okay, and we talk with them and then they make a proposal. The other one is someone just has an idea. So in terms of the flow, we have tried to make it as developer friendly and open as possible.
Nice.
Because that's our target audience.
Yeah.
Right? We don't want them to have to deal with a lot of paperwork. As a developer, no one likes that. So everything's done on GitHub. We PRs, we basically you submit a PR to the grants repository. We review it and approve it. It's just like reviewing, a code PR, except the text is in English. Essentially, you need a certain percentage of the grants committee to approve your grant based on the size of the grant. So there's different levels. The smallest one below 10,000, the greatest above 100,000, and it just gets more difficult as you move forward, depending on how much you're asking. So there's occasionally a team wants to discuss something with us in private. They have something that's like some intellectual property that they don't want the public to see on GitHub.
Okay.
But in general, everything is open. It's all done on GitHub. We try to follow the open source ethos, even with this.
Gotcha. When an applicant gets stuck or it looks like a milestone isn't going to be completed, what do you think are the main barriers to that?
I think sometimes it's just people bit off more than they could chew.
Oh, yeah. Right.
This is something, we try ahead of time to talk with the people, look at their background, suggest perhaps a smaller thing.
Yes.
And we often, modify grants, right? So if someone says, hey, we've been working on this, but for technical reason X, Y, and Z, we can't really do this. So could we do this instead? We're generally pretty open. Or extending time out. If something we said we would get it done in 2 months, it's going to take another month, or whatever. Someone left the team. We're very flexible with people like that have problems like this. But in terms of problems, we have a lot of times people say, it's too much. I can't get it done. Or there's their interest shift. What we've seen. Let's say those are the main ones, and we have a few teams that just stop responding.
Okay.
So I don't know why.
What can you do?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Do any grants come to mind, like when you think about the big successes of the grant program, some projects that made a big impact on the mission of this grant program?
If you look back, a lot of the early parachain teams started as grants.
Right.
Yeah, I would say that's some of our biggest successes, right? So Moonbeam and Akala, especially, their teams, they started by getting grants and building, and you also have a lot of projects. That the team, maybe the grant itself didn't work out or the project didn't work out, but it got that team interested in it.
Got them together.
Got them together, or even so David, who was the former grants lead, he started by submitting a grant.
I see.
And eventually ended up at Web3 Foundation and was the grants lead. He's now doing work on spec here. He's still around. Yeah, so we can see like the benefit of grants is not just the actual grant.
That's right.
I think it provides an entry point for a lot of people, as well as a sort of, I'm not sure what the word is, like a confirmation that what they're doing is useful and they can do it, and that there is interesting stuff to work on in Polkadot.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so some of these grants end up turning into businesses or attempts at businesses, like a parachain or something like that. We've been seeing lately, or at least it's been more notable lately, that some veer off into the Treasury as well. I think it's a little bit difficult. I think teams, maybe aren't prepared for the state of OpenGov sometimes.
Yeah.
Why are some teams asked to go into the Treasury? And maybe how can we prepare teams better to be successful there? It
is, it's a very different process, right? And interacting, with our grant evaluators. I don't want to say anything about the average, a voter on governance. I'm not trying to say anything bad, but the grant evaluators here, that is what they do, right? They look at that all day, every day. That's their job. So they tend to ask very technical questions. They understand like the pitfalls people have had. I see OpenGov is much more rough and tumble.
Yeah.
And so, I think that a lot of people are not prepared for that.
Right.
It's a different mechanism, right? Getting the word out to DOT holders in general versus like the specific grant evaluators on the committee.
That's right.
On the grants committee.
Right.
It's
there's like a few of them, and there's like 400 faceless holders, right? Yeah. It's like way different.
Yeah, and it goes back to like what we said about when I first moved here and away from university.
Yeah.
Back when I would have between 20 and 50 students in a class, and those students, they paid to be there. They paid a lot of money, and if they didn't want to do the work, all right, well, I don't care. I can give you an F, right?
Yeah.
But most did not want to do that, right? They were there of their own volition. And it was a very small group. So dealing with that was very different than now interacting with hundreds or thousands of people, right? It's a very different process. Again, I'm not saying one is better or one is worse at this point, but it's different and people need to get used to it. So the other thing though is that the Treasury has a lot more scope for funding.
Right.
I mean, the Polkadot Treasury, I don't know the latest numbers. You probably are better acquainted with, because at the beginning of AAG.
44 million or something or something like that. Yeah.
And so last year, we gave out a few million in grants over the last year. So there's a lot more available.
True.
But it's also different in other ways, right? We tend to give out in fiat, in US dollars or euros mostly. Whereas you get DOT or KSM. So there is a lot more scope there. I also think that there is the on-chain treasury is much more in line with the general ethos of Polkadot, right? We are trying to decentralize. Ideally, we want people to come to a collective decision. Right. I in some ways I don't like, and I know there are some, some people out there also that, say like, why should Bill have this power over this, right? Or why does Web3 Foundation have this power? And it's something we're very aware of. We try to be, have a light touch in the way we do things, and try to be as neutral as possible, like relatively neutral, and give our, opinions on things. But, in some ways it is kind of weird, right? We're heading a decentralized ecosystem, or we're trying to build this decentralized ecosystem rather. And, there's a relatively small grants committee. And so it's something that we see, like if you want to really be in the true decentralized ethos, it makes more sense to go to the Treasury route. The other way there's much more scope is that we have a very, again, specific mandate, right, for technical or research projects that will benefit the Polkadot or greater blockchain ecosystem. I'm sort of paraphrasing here our what we're supposed to do, our wheelhouse, but it's that's it. But we see lots of other things happening on on the on-chain treasury, right? So marketing, content, all of this stuff that is we are not equipped to evaluate.
Right. You don't do events or anything
Events,
like that, right?
Yeah, nothing like that.
Hackathons?
No.
Yeah, only technical building.
Right, exactly. Like technical building projects or research. So like what comes out of a Web3 grant is running code, or a paper.
Right.
Essentially. To me, it makes sense, that all these other things are handled by the Treasury and not, our team specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you paying attention to OpenGov? Is it an interest of yours?
Oh, I pay I pay attention to OpenGov.
You do? Okay.
Literally every morning, I look. I'm old school. I still look at it via Polkadot.js.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. No disrespect to Subsquare or Polkassembly. I use them to see comments, but every morning when I'm writing the Polkadot Digest, this is part of my routine, right? I look. I see what's happening. I was telling you before this that I can't ever hear AAG live because the timing doesn't work, but I do catch up and hear the comments. I vote. If you look at the bill account on Polkadot and Kusama, you will see me contributing. I leave comments when necessary. I'm very interested in OpenGov.
What did you think about the transition to OpenGov? Starting over on Kusama.
Speaking as a former Kusama council member, I was very. I was there till the very end. I was really happy to see this moving on because it is decentralized, right? And I mean, I think the council had it had done its time, right? Or I'm not sure if that's the phrase, but its time was up. We were ready to move on.
That's right. Yeah. Was it a big burden to be on the council? Was it a lot of responsibility, a lot of time?
That's a really good question. It was a burden.
Yeah.
And not just, so right now there are Treasury proposals that I see and I either don't vote on or abstain from. I just don't know, or if I say I don't have time to look into this.
Right.
That really wasn't an option on the council, especially on the Kusama Council where you had a much smaller time period. I didn't want my decision process to be a random number generator. Right?
Yeah.
I wanted to look into these. And some teams post like 40 or 50 page
I know. Yeah.
Yeah, 40 or 50 page proposals.
Yeah.
And as a council member, that's when I really felt obligated
Crazy.
to read through. And this is a lot of extra work on top of what I normally did. So it was a burden. And also the responsibility, right?
Yeah.
So, I vote, but I'm not a whale. Right. So, I vote. There are definitely others that can overwhelm my vote. When I was on the Kusama Council, I was a big percentage of any decision that was made.
That's right.
And and not to sound egotistical, but heavy is the head that wears the crown.
Absolutely, yeah.
I really wanted to think, is this the right thing to do? And if I whatever, I was like 7% or 10%, right, of the vote. Whatever, approximately that. That's a lot different than right now where, it's not like I don't have any dot, but there are whales out there.
Absolutely,
in OpenGov that can change. I don't have nearly as much responsibility. So it was quite a burden.
The council seemed to me, and what became the Kusama, and we came up to the council. Thank you for your support and everything back then. It seemed, I would say, well, it goes back and forth with OpenGov now, but it was very optimistic, the council. Most things, Raul was there and he did a lot of work adjusting proposals and making sure they were successful, but there wasn't a lot of rejection in the council. Is that true? Would you say the same?
I don't know the percentages, but that's certainly the feeling that I get, the general vibe. I think that's because it was a much more formalized process.
Yeah.
Right? That, before something went to the council, generally there was a lot of talk with Raul or Otar.
That's right.
Or someone behind the scenes. Because it was a process. Right. Maybe it wasn't written down, but generally people would post something in Polkassembly, just for discussion ahead of time. And the council members, I think generally were more optimistic. This also could be because Polkadot had just launched.
That's right.
And I think we can. I don't like to talk about price, but obviously there's more funding available when the price is higher.
That's right.
So that was another reason, perhaps. So in terms of drawdown, right, the percentage would be less.
It was also an earlier time, right? We didn't know what was working. It was like, let's just try a bunch of stuff out, and see what happens. That was really cool as well. I also miss the tipping culture. Tipping culture was fun.
I was really shocked, actually. So there was a tip for Limo. On there. I can't remember the referendum number off the top of my head. And somebody was saying, like, oh, so this is what the Polkadot Treasury has come to. It's being used to tip people. And like, tipping has been a part of, the report awesome extrinsic has been there since the beginning, right? This is always meant to be. That's why we have, a small tipper, big tipper track, right? Like
report awesome. Yes.
Yeah. This is something we want, right? That we saw this, the beginning of Bitcoin, right? That was a big thing on Reddit. You could tip people that were doing interesting things with Bitcoin. In the Dogecoin subreddit, right? You could tip. It's actually really fun to, if you go through the old Bitcoin subreddit posts where people were tipping like 5 Bitcoin for a funny comment or something.
How would you do that?
There was a bot.
Okay.
And so it was, slash tip or bang tip, username, whatever. And then the bot, had some, you basically had an account with the bot, and then it would, send that Bitcoin. Maybe it wasn't 5 Bitcoin.
Sweet.
It was a significant amount that you would tip people. And then it would send it on chain. Then Bitcoin's price went up and people were less interested in tipping.
Right.
Yeah. We saw the same thing with the Dogecoin subreddit. And, so I think that might just be a natural evolution of ecosystems. At the beginning, people are very optimistic. They're trying things out and they see something cool and they're willing to share. And, perhaps just, like as times evolve, again, generally not going to name any names, but they're definitely like scammers and grifters. People get burned, and so they become more conservative. So that also could be, a part of why tipping is the tipping culture, I think, is less than it used to be.
Is there any aspect of OpenGov today that concerns you? Parts of it you have on your radar? You're curious to see how it goes?
Yeah, I mean, I have my own ideas for like some things that could be tweaked.
Yeah, talk to me about that.
Yeah, so one is I think it's very cheap to make a proposal, and it's very difficult to kill that proposal.
Yeah.
So you may know there is a total spam referendum 203, an airdrop scam, and they put down the 100 dot. As a decision deposit, and so I have a killer for that. But so that's cool. That'll slash that deposit. I'm always happy to slash scammers dot.
Nice.
But that was a 50,000 dot decision deposit
for the killer.
For the killer.
Holy.
Yeah. Some very nice person did that for me. I honestly don't know who, so thank you. It's an anonymous account.
Wow. Okay.
Thank you, whoever out there has done that. So, but like this is relatively cheap, right? Like 100 dot, and you could do something. But to get rid of it, it's 50,000 dot.
Right. Yeah.
This really seems like an imbalance to me.
That's right.
Yeah. And similarly, right, to put a proposal out there is very cheap, which in some ways is good. Okay, like you just need 1 dot generally as your submission deposit. It's basically as an anti-scam measure. But that makes it very easy for people to throw out a bunch of garbage proposals. They don't even need to put a decision deposit.
Right.
Honestly, this airdropper, right? It also would have displayed if they had not put the submission deposit. So, so I do think we should look at some of these numbers. Like the specifics of them. It's something I've discussed internally with people. But of course, there's always trade-offs, right? You want to make sure people can feel involved in governance and be involved in governance, that anyone can make a proposal, right? It's very, I shouldn't say anyone, but it's very cheap.
Sure, yeah.
Another big thing that I think could be modified is this idea that you can continue to change your vote as time goes on, which in some ways I think is good. So actually, Paradox, I remember I was voting for, now I can't remember what it was, but I remember Paradox talking online and arguing, and I actually changed my mind. It was some proposal, and I remember, so Paradox, thank you. And he changed my mind. And so I changed my vote from I to nay or nay to I. I can't remember.
Yeah,
this is a while ago. So I don't think like we should say, oh, well, once you put your vote in, it's stuck like that forever.
Right. It could delay the vote a lot, right?
Well, it could delay the vote a lot. And I think that sometimes like you should be able to change your mind, right?
Sure.
But on the other hand, I see a lot of people playing games with this, where it's like, they do like, 6x conviction, 1x conviction, 0.1x, 3x, which is, is also problematic, right? And doesn't, or people like, changing their vote at the last minute. So I do think that we could play with this. I haven't really thought through, but maybe you can't you can't lower your conviction. You can always increase your conviction, but not lower it, for instance. So that way, like if you see that something isn't passing, you could increase your conviction, but you can't do these games of constantly, changing your conviction or changing your vote.
What about the social side? I mean, I think especially recently, there are some small holders or possibly no holders, which are maybe a little bit salty about the lack of influence they have in the ecosystem. I hear the word democratic thrown around a lot, but it's first of all a slightly ambiguous term. I would challenge people as to whether or not this system was meant to be, one person, one vote, and how people think of it. What are your thoughts on the balance of power as far as token holdings go?
Yeah. So first, let me preface this with, I was actually a political science undergrad. So
perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I've actually looked into this and thought about this a lot.
Yes.
And you're for some definition of democratic, like, yes, this is not democratic, right? It is not one person, one vote. Definitely from a person, from an entity perspective, okay, it's not. But the problem is at a base layer, Sybil resistance in a way that's decentralized is very difficult.
Yeah.
Okay. Not impossible. We see teams, like Kilt, like Polymech, that are working on, in Cointer. Like there are lots of teams working on ways to do this and have like, Sybil resistance in some way. But it's hard to do that in a truly anonymous way. It's hard to do that in a truly decentralized way. Again, I'm not saying impossible. I'm not saying this is something that is unsolvable.
Yeah.
But I do see right now that there is in general a benefit to token-based voting. There are a lot of drawbacks. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, this is perfect. And yes, whoever has whatever 50 million DOT, then they get to make all the rules. However, the person with 50 million DOT is going to be very invested in the network.
Of course.
There is that benefit, right? They're probably not going to vote for something that's really, really horrible for the network.
Yeah.
So at least that sense, in a sort of like small c conservative sense, like it ensures that the network will continue to operate. And to me, that's extremely important. It's not perfect. It is nowhere near perfect. But I do think it has a lot of benefits right now. And I haven't seen I've seen a lot of proposals, for changing this. I read the Polkadot forum. I've seen this. I've thought about it. I haven't seen anything that really keeps all of the benefits that we really want to keep. Like that, that small c conservative is super important to me.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not speaking politically left versus right.
No, I understand.
I'm speaking in the sense that we should be biased in general against change unless we're really sure it's safe. And so I think that is a big benefit you get. This is like real life too. Let's talk about politics. You said let's not censor ourselves. So all right, so here I go. Right. So there's a famous Winston Churchill quote, right, about like if you're young and not left wing, you have no heart. If you're old and not right wing, you have no head. Something like that. You think of like again like lower C conservative. Generally like old people, rich people. Again, I know I'm making some stereotypes here, but in some cases that's good, right? Like right. I understand, we do want to change. We want some exciting things to happen. And I know some people get very frustrated that the pace of, even though I think compared to any other blockchain, Polkadot evolves extremely quickly.
Absolutely.
But I do know some people get frustrated, right, with that it's not as fast as they would like.
Right.
But I do think like, our main goal, if I think, if the network stops working, we're stuck.
That's
right? It doesn't matter how democratic the system is if its network's not working.
Yeah.
And so I do think in terms of blockchain, again, I'm not going to talk about like your real life governance systems, but at least in blockchain, you do want this bias towards the status quo. That doesn't mean the status quo should never change, but absent, it should be work to make it change. And I think that's sort of what conservatism here means. So another quote, what's his face? William F. Buckley, like a conservative's job is to stand athwart history saying stop.
That's right.
We do need someone that's holding this back.
We don't want to fall apart.
We don't want to fall apart.
Yeah.
Right? And so in some senses, like, having this token-based economy really is a bias towards the status quo and safety and, making sure that things work before trying anything too risky, right? It's systemically built in that people that have a lot of DOT are not going to want to risk that DOT.
That's right.
So it's all incentives, right? And I think that this system of token-based voting incentivizes conservatism. I do think that I have not seen something that the benefits, and I do see a lot of benefits to having something that's more one person, one vote, makes sense. But for the core protocol layer of Polkadot, I think that the incentives are very much aligned right now with token-based voting.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. And we are waiting to see. We need something that will work better. And, we're not going to sacrifice keeping it together. We're not going to sacrifice our futures just for, something more ideological, something more that is good in theory, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, we've seen this in real life so many times, right? We're very, ideological, groups that had the best of intentions.
Yeah.
And when you make changes very quickly, sometimes bad things can happen. I'm sure you can think of times in history, right, that this has occurred.
Some of the most avid users of blockchains are victims of such changes, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's interesting. What direction or advice would you give to someone who doesn't have access to a lot of DOT, but is eager to contribute to the ecosystem and is eager to make a name for themselves in this in Polkadot?
Yeah, great question. Because this is something, right? We get a lot of people that may not have a lot of DOT. Or lack the ability to get a lot of DOT, but they can still contribute, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, the simplest way, that's probably the least powerful, is conviction voting. So you can lock up your DOT for longer, and your vote could be worth up to 6 times as much. Communicating in the forums.
Yeah.
Right. And I already said, I know, Paradox had. I remember, I changed my mind. I said, yeah, I was wrong on this vote, and I'll change it now. I see a lot of people in the forums in Kusama direction and Polkadot direction that have changed, my mind.
Yeah.
I'm sure they change, different whales' minds as well. So that's another thing. Delegation, right? There are some accounts out there that they don't have a lot of DOT on their own, but a lot of people have agreed with their analysis and said, okay, I'll vote for them, right? I will delegate my DOT to them. So that's another thing, right? You may have not a lot of DOT, but you may have a lot of voting power because others have delegated to you. Finally, if you really want to get involved, there's always the fellowship, right?
There you go.
The fellowship with whitelisting calls and the discussions that they have. It is a process to join the fellowship, but it's a well-defined process. Many people have done it. So Syed, who's one of the researchers here at Web3, he just joined a day or two ago. So that's another way, right? You can get involved. Commenting on RFCs for the Polkadot Fellowship, right? You go on GitHub, look at the RFCs, and you make comments. Everyone that's making decisions in Polkadot, all the DOT holders, as far as I know, they're all people, right? They're swayed. Okay?
Yeah.
And it's just like, in the US, there are a lot of people that have a lot of sway over people because of the articles they write or the tweets that they write, and they change a lot of opinion. They change a lot of power, or they have a lot of power rather, even if they don't have it in terms of voting, right? It's not like they go to the voting booth and they get to do 100 votes or something.
Yep.
But they can convince people, and I think that is really important and really powerful, and not always appreciated, like this ability to sway.
Or people will throw out their social capital by griefing everybody or something like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could do the opposite as well. I don't know how well that would work, but yes.
Well, we see it doesn't work very well, actually. Yeah,
I think we've seen some cases of that in the past. Yeah,
but it's so cool. We have this token layer, and then we have this social layer, which is so rich, and we get to contribute to that layer with this show as well. And I just have to say, it was so great to finally have you on. Great working alongside you. You brought me in. You educated me on everything that's going on. And I know you do the same for so many others. So thank you very much for the work you do. And thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. I'll say, it's been great. I'm so happy that I bring people in like you to the ecosystem who do so much great work. And please keep it up.
Thank you very much, Bill.
Thank you.